Hello, welcome to part 3 of this Jones Act explainer video. If you're here for the first time, make sure to watch part 1 and part 2, and if you're here to watch part 3, welcome back. Sorry that it's been a while. There's just a revolution happening, and I also live in Los Angeles, so things are a bit crazy. Anyways, on with the video. One thing that I wanted to mention was that I'll be doing another video just kind of recapping everything that we've learned thus far about the Jones Act, but in Spanish, because that was requested, so if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. Welcome to part 3, and enjoy. This is a horrible pop culture Netflix comparison, but I don't know if you've seen Tiger King.
I have.
Okay. Remember how they would take the baby tigers and bring them to the politicians, and then they would take the politicians, everyone would be taking photos with the baby tigers, and then those photos are there. Those photos are out on the internet, and they can't really vote against baby tigers in any way. You know, they're going against their beliefs. The tiger breeders got to the politicians first.
Well, yeah, it's the same thing here. It's if someone votes or is inclined to support Jones Act repeal or just reform, they say, well, why do you hate American shipbuilders? Why do you hate the people that crew our ships? If there's something that you want to make sure doesn't get changed, or there's a policy that you like, just insist that it's for national security. Because then if anyone goes against it, you can just say, well, you don't care about American national security. You know, you don't care about the safety of our homeland. How could you take that position? And I think the Jones Act lobby has been very skilled at advancing this idea that the Jones Act is very necessary and very needed to support U.S. national security. Therefore, if you're against it, not only are you against American shipyards, et cetera, but it means that you don't care about U.S. national security.
You're against America.
Exactly. They wrap themselves in the flag very successfully, and it makes it much more challenging to effectively address this issue, as long as that perception is out there that this law is needed to support the U.S. military. Also, if you buy into this logic, then it's hugely unfair to Puerto Rico. Because what it means is that Puerto Rico is footing this hugely disproportionate amount of the bill to pay for these sailors. If this is truly a benefit for all Americans, then why is Puerto Rico, which is less than 1% of the population, and which again would be the poorest U.S. state, why are we sticking them with a huge amount of the bill? We need to spread this across all Americans. If it's a benefit for all Americans, it should be paid by all Americans, not disproportionately Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico.
Right. And this is why I originally thought that this was a social issue. And I think it's a bit of everything. It's a social issue. It's economic.
National security, it touches everything.
And that's why it's so confusing, I think, because I'm like, I don't know how to come at this. There's a lot.
You can frame it any number of ways, yeah. Precisely because it has so many aspects to it. I think there are a lot of opportunities to create some really unique coalitions here.
What can us normies that are not policy analysts do about the Jones Act? If we kind of get the gist of it, we know that most people agree that it would be better to not have the Jones Act, at least for Puerto Rico. It was waived for 10 days after Hurricane Maria, and I remember it was too late in the game. Like, it was a little of a late response. How can something like that happen again, or how did that get organized?
So that got organized because after Hurricane Maria hit, of course, people were trying to get supplies to Puerto Rico, and all of a sudden, a lot of people realized there's something called the Jones Act, which makes it more difficult than would otherwise be the case to get supplies to Jones Act. If, say, there's a foreign ship sitting in a port in the United States, and you say, hey, let's grab that ship, put some stuff on it, send it to Puerto Rico. You can't do it, because it's foreign. At the very moment that a lot of Americans were thinking, how can we help Puerto Rico? Well, the Jones Act lobby was thinking, how can we prevent a waiver from getting issued? That was where their primary concern was. Well, as you said, 10 days is not enough. The crisis did not end after 10 days. You could argue the crisis is ongoing. I think we can have lots of disagreements about the best approach, but one thing we should all agree on is the first thing we should do is stop hurting Puerto Rico. And this is a federal law that is hurting Puerto Rico. So at the very least, let's stop hurting them. Maybe we disagree about how to help them, but let's stop standing on Puerto Rico's neck with laws like this. And then as far as what can people do, again, I just go back to the Jones Act lobby wins because they're the ones knocking on doors and they're the ones saying, if you support this law, then you've got our vote, you've got our support, and you can count on us. And I think our legislators, they respond to incentives, and they need to know that there are a lot of people out there who care about this law, either in general or in particular through the lens of Puerto Rico. One asset that Puerto Rico has is while it doesn't have voting representation in Congress, it has a pretty sizable diaspora. And they should include a lot of Puerto Ricans in Florida, which is a very key state, for elections. And I think Puerto Ricans in particular need to organize and say, you want our vote? You need to do something about the Jones Act. You need to give us an exemption, or at the very least, let us buy, say, U.S. natural gas. Just let us do business with the mainland more efficiently. This is good for us, and it'll be good for you too, because we want to buy your stuff at reasonable prices. And there needs to be a cost to supporting the Jones Act. There need to be benefits to people that do the right thing here. So just, I think if nothing else, ask people running for Congress, where do you stand on this issue? Just at the very least, force them to take a stance and justify their position on it. I think would be a very good place to start.
Seems doable.
I would hope. Something I always say is if we could just get Jennifer Lopez and the director of Hamilton to
Lin-Manuel.
Exactly. If we could just get Lin-Manuel to speak out.
We need J-Lo, Lin-Manuel, and Bad Bunny. They're on the top right now.
Done.
I think that pretty much covers a lot. June 5th is the 100-year anniversary. How are we celebrating? Is anything happening?
Originally, the Cato Institute was planning on having an event around the 100-year anniversary to highlight the cost of this law and all the different ways that Americans have suffered. But we'll continue to raise our voice about this. And I think at 100 years, I think for any law, after 100 years, it's a good opportunity to stop and think, is this still working? Is this serving the purpose it was intended? I understand that change is scary. And maybe instead of getting rid of the Jones Act all at once, a good starting place would be, let's exempt Puerto Rico. And that could be a test case. And if it brings the benefits that I think it will, then that would be an argument for moving forward and further liberalizing this law. But we have to start somewhere.
I think that's a great way to end this. And I had one last question. How did you get involved with this? Did you ever anticipate that you would be so closely tied with Puerto Rican politics?
I did not. I've been at the Cato Institute about 2.5 years. And when I was hired, my now boss told me, he said, one thing I want to do is to launch an initiative highlighting the cost of the Jones Act. Well, I started work in late September of 2017, right when Hurricane Maria hit. So I think that one of the first op-eds I ever wrote was about the Jones Act in Puerto Rico. And when you start writing about the Jones Act, on the surface, this is very straightforward law. And you start digging into it and seeing the costs and seeing the effects, and you think, this is crazy. This doesn't make sense. And the more you dig and the deeper you go, the more head scratching and bizarre it becomes. And at first, I think a lot of people, to the extent they're aware of the Jones Act, they see it as this irritating, nonsensical little law. But I think the effects are just so much more dramatic than what your average American can appreciate. I think that all the efficiencies that we're leaving on the table and all the good that could be realized if we were to do something about this law, I think the vast majority of people really underestimate that and don't fully appreciate that. And just over time, the more I research this, the more I'm convinced that Jones Act reform could just be so beneficial for the United States. And it's not this minor little irritating law. It's a big deal. It's a real big deal, especially for Puerto Rico. And again, I think that bringing reform to Puerto Rico would be an excellent starting place for more general reform for the rest of the United States.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for the great questions.
This conversation with Colin was super informative to me, and I hope this cleared up some of your questions about the Jones Act. And if it didn't, leave a comment and feel free to DM me because I might do a follow-up video to this. I'm happy to have an open conversation here. Basically, if there's anything that you want to do, just ask your local politician, where do you stand on the Jones Act? Talk to people. If you're a part of the diaspora, bring it up. Vote in local elections. Ask your politicians. Ask your friends. Ask your family. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
My name is Carlos Irizarry, and I vouch for the independence of Puerto Rico.